Thank you both. Excellent opening for some conversation, and some people already want to have some questions for you. Somebody wants to push the area of I think you've answered this, but I think maybe that you need to make the point clearer. Both of you have answered this really. There's always the worry, and this has to do with arts and in the way we use arts in general, is that you worry that it's simply entertainment. But both of you were arguing that it's something really more than that. Say something about that.
If I begin, yes, I think that's perhaps an opening that we take to it, and especially people like me who are not musicians but who are academics and who are who are used to attributing serious meaning to words and analysis and text. And from that perspective, I'm sometimes wondering whether this is a very academic problem to see that the arts are just illustrations to it. I think this was my concern when I started my interest in interreligious dialogue from the beginning, because I started from an interreligious peace appeal in Finland, which had been signed by archbishops and the imam and the rabbi and so on. And I went to talk with them, and they just, quoted scripture after scripture, and they quoted Levinas in German. And I thought, this isn't really what I was after. And then I got the idea, well, if I ask the artists, they are going to look at it in a different way. And that's how it started evolving. So I think it requires a way of listening seriously to other ways of creating knowledge. But I think it's also, for us who are teachers and who are scholars, it's also a challenge of seeing a little bit broader than just we love our own text and our own words. And I think we believe that the whole world is built upon rational analysis. So I think it starts already with the school teachers and so on.
I tend to agree. I would just overstate it, probably, of what you just said. That was a very nuanced way of saying it. I would just say, what on earth is wrong with entertainment? On any number of levels. You mentioned my TV book, and it's fascinating in that I teach a class on contemporary TV, and what usually happens, I'd like to think a lot of things occur, but more than anything else, students walk away going like, oh, I shouldn't feel bad for enjoying the TV that I watch. Well, no. Who said entertainment is bad? And in fact, from a theological Christian perspective, this was written into who we were and are as human beings from the get-go, that this notion of God resting on the seventh day isn't a passivity, but it was a delight and celebration in our created context, that we're supposed to go out and play, right? We're supposed to go enjoy the created order. And music and entertainment, it's no small wonder that throughout human history, people have always gotten together to perform and entertain. That there is something about delighting in that strikes at the core of who we are. And to diminish the value of that or significance, I think is right in terms of how we've sort of academized or overly rationalized our approach to what is significant or meaningful. So for me, yes, the arts are entertainment, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. Somebody wanted to know, and this is something that I'm sure that many in the audience, and this is School of Missions and things, what is creating this space? How does that relate to a witness to the gospel in particular?
Well, I can start with that point. Even though I have never actually thought so much about it, because missiology really isn't my field. But what I gather from these interviews that I've been doing with these persons who are deeply engaged in their own traditions and deeply committed to the choir work, it is, they all start from the same point, that you cannot enter into this sort of open musical dialogue space if you're unsure of where you stand yourself, because then it just becomes a mishmash of everything. So I think for many of them, it was the interest and the openness just confirmed themselves in who they were. But for many of them, they also underlined the fact that you need to know where you stand yourself so that you can, in that way, engage in the dialogue. So, I mean, I wouldn't see it as a danger. If it's dangerous to sing hymns from other traditions, then your faith might not have a very stable ground from the beginning, I would say. So then you might need to work with other aspects of your faith.
Good, thank you. That's helpful.
Do you want me to respond to the same question?
Kutter, yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot about this. I think more outside of interreligious. Most of my work is now in sort of non-religious or anti-religious contexts, even, and asking that same missional question. And I think it's interesting to me. There's a number of explicitly atheist congregations that now have cropped up all over the world. A few in LA here, in Europe, in the UK, and especially in sort of Western contexts where deconversion and non-belief are on the rise. It's fascinating to me that all these people get together and they make music. There is an impoverishment of communal music making in the world, and where it happens is in communities of faith. Like, this is what people who are religious do. And if you're not a part of that, all of a sudden you realize, I don't have this really important mechanism for me to come together and experience what I was talking about, my body resonating with the body of another in some meaningful way. Now, none of that has to do with the content of the gospel. At the same time, it is inseparable from the gospel, as I understand it. Yeah. And I think that for me is the missional turn of saying, I need to be comfortable in certain contexts, aesthetic contexts, musical contexts, that allow, in my notion, the Spirit of God to work in ways that can't be tethered so tightly to, was there doctrinal information communicated or conveyed in this moment? And instead saying, God is up to something when my body encounters the body of another. And that's something that I think is missionally powerful.
That's right. Good. Yeah. Somebody wants to know about, we're creating these spaces. How is it that we can invite into these spaces people who are not seeking peace or not seeking reconciliation?
I think this is one of the really key questions, because as with all interreligious and interfaith, all discussions, all events, everything, people who come tend to be those who are already saved for the good message. And those who are not interested in interreligious dialogue will absolutely not be there. And I think the Hassan Kempin, that he has one of his points there was that dialogue has to be multidimensional, and music is just one of them. So just by exploring different kinds of contexts, I mean, I think it's a good and relevant point, especially from a European point of view, where people tend to be extremely uninterested in religion. That these kind of events can also become dialogues between the secular and the religious, and just opening up the eyes for people who have no contact to religion whatsoever to see what it might be all about. But in the same way, perhaps a musical dialogue can somehow be a reach out to somebody who has a musical background. But then, I mean, we need dialogue in the football field and in the grocery store and in the school class and in the, all these kind of different, because I've been following interreligious dialogue on the internet also. It was an accidental dialogue that actually occurred in Facebook as the Vietnamese Buddhist temple in my hometown was violated. And to see that was for sort of space where people who actually had never thought they would go to a real interreligious event, if it's called an interreligious event, they would never go there. But they were hanging out on Facebook, and suddenly they were involved in this discussion and started to see all these dimensions that they would never have seen before. So I think the multidimensional is really, but I don't have a good answer really to this, because if you are convinced that dialogue is bad and that you have the only truth and the rest must be conquered in some way, what do you do? Can you answer that?
I don't know what I said that makes you think I could, but is the answer to, you said, to people who are hostile to dialogue,
or not interested in peace? Is there a space for peace building and reconciliation?
again, I'll Christianize it since I'm a theologian, I guess here. It's appropriate. I would say, what did Jesus do in response to that? He took a very specific posture that resulted in a very clear conclusion to his life. And if, in fact, we are committed to dialogue, if, in fact, we are committed to the other and to peace as a part of that, as a core part of that, I think our response has to be a radical hospitality. That absolutely is one of the most risky things we can do, especially in the current society. And I think John Caputo has informed my thinking on this a lot when it comes to just the notion of hospitality. So these spaces we're creating in arts or anywhere else, we like to think, the root word of hospitality, hostess, is where we get to host. We get the host. I play the part of the host. It's where we get hospital or a hostel, like you go stay place. It's also where we get the word hostel and hostage, which means to create a space of hospitality as a Christian isn't to open up your space to people who already affirm you and think like you and approve of you and are going to be kind and sympathetic and peaceful to you. It's actually to open up your most intimate of spaces to the hostile, to the one who threatens your very existence. I'm a father of 3 young girls. I don't want to do that, period. I don't want to do it. And Jesus calls me to something different. And that's the challenge I think we face, that it's not an easy answer or response, but it's the only way I see forward is to double down on a peaceful hospitality that's very risky.
Good, thank you. Ruth, your example dealt with basically the 3 Abrahamic religions. Would you have any comments on another question related to the fact that the different spiritual religious traditions have a different spirituality? Do we lose something in trying to create a unity of experience when those spiritualities are quite different?
That's a very good question, and I think I really don't know the reason why this choir had ventured to be this Abrahamic trialogue. And of course, I mean, it was the Jewish and Christian initiative back. It's a very personal initiative of these 2 cantors. But of course, it also reflects a historical situation and somehow a rootedness and a certain line of dialogue, which is quite common, I think, often that we restrict ourselves to these. And I think that by broadening it, it would need to take a different form, and it would need to be a different kind of. I mean, choir music as such is quite a Western phenomenon, so that would need to be built in a different way. But I'm sure there are these.
So too are harpsichords.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, true, yes, and the kind of high tenors they had is a very German thing too. So yeah. But I'm sure there are these possibilities, and I think they would need to start from a very different place. And I would love to hear examples of this, if anybody knows about these kind of groups, because there must be. And I mean, we've seen wonderful examples just today about music that does a dialogue between Christian message and different contextual cultures. So I think there are many examples, but I don't. I'll be happy to hear if somebody wants to share.
Any last words?
Is this the time when I can ask you questions?
Yeah.
Good. First of all, I want to know where the Begbie quote was from, but we can take that later. Yeah. I think it's very... the thing you said about the embodied practices and that the act of singing as such is an embodied practice. And I fully share that... that viewpoint, and I mean just breathing as such, as you do. I mean, already that will embody the message, because you have to. That's what sustains your body. But as I said, I'm also a researcher within Jewish studies, and I've recently finished a 4-year research project among progressive Jews in London, and how these extremely liberal, cosmopolitan, well-educated Jewish people in multicultural London, how they are increasingly exploring very traditional forms of liturgy, because many of them feel that they want to preserve their liberal, inclusive theological stance, but they want to have the tradition. So they're throwing out the English, taking in the Hebrew. And what really caught my attention there is a song practice, a Hasidic practice called nigunim, which is wordless singing, where you sing just lai lai. You skip all the words and you just sing lai lai. And many of these young, well-educated Jews, I mean, these are studying to be rabbis. They can read the original texts, but they're so tired of it. They don't want to go to the synagogue anymore and just hear the rabbi telling you what you should believe, and then you have to go, oh, do I have to take a stand on this one? And what do I take? So they just want to go and sing lai lai. And with these nigunim, they show, of course, that the act of singing as such is the prayer, not the words that are uttered. And I feel that's an extremely interesting example. There were some nigunim lai lai also in this concert. They just didn't, the German TV didn't see the greatness of just that part, which is sorry. But I think that's a good example of what you were saying that I wanted to add to it. Yeah.
Well, and that's where I thought where you're going was fantastic. And then in some ways you then have to kind of focus your analysis on this concert. So it doesn't really work quite as well. And because the dialogue, that was the interesting thing, the dialogue does happen with this sacred text, with the theologians afterwards talking. So there still is a lot of what we would consider second order reflection. And so that's that example, I think, in particular, is one that I think is a great demonstration of something else happens too. The hard part is, back to your point, is that, so what's happening there, right? Is that enough? Are they, is that a sort of impoverishment of prayer, or is that in fact a full realization of prayer? Or is it really just the best thing we can hope for that community of people? And that's where I still don't quite know the answer either.
And the point is that what's generative is the heart and core of the tradition. In this case, these sacred texts. These are generative. So thank you both very much. Yeti sheni do